Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello everyone, and thanks for tuning in to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Ridenauer, and it's going to be another fun one today. I hope everyone had a really good weekend. I know for me, I had a long weekend, to say the least. I've been doing quite a bit of packing as I'm getting ready to move this week, just down the road here in Pittsburgh, nothing too far, but nonetheless, I'm sure anyone out there that has had to move knows what I'm talking about. Anyways, I hope everyone had a great last few days and have enjoyed the last few, really opening days of the MLB season. So for today, I'm going to jump into a segment I like to call Around the Horn, where I'll do recaps and rundowns of games of that day, which is, as of today of recording, Sunday, July 26th. So I'll give you all the breakdown of these games that happened today and some matchups to look forward to this week. I'll then discuss which teams I feel like could really benefit from this expanded playoff format and why they could benefit and what exactly this new playoff format is going to look like. After that, I'll give my second divisional breakdown, this time with the AL East. Last time I gave the rundown for the NL East, but now I want to jump over to the NL's counterpart and give my breakdown of the first through five spots in the AL East. My final segment today, I'm going to wrap it up ranking my top 5 greatest Red Sox-Yankees rivalry moments in history. A very storied rivalry, something that has been going on really for decades now. So there's a lot of different moments to make note of and to talk about. I want to dive into it, though, right now. It's going to be a really good show. I appreciate everybody tuning in. But before, I get into anything, baseball is officially in full swing, and I cannot tell you all how great it is to feel that anytime you click on the TV, at least on one channel during some point of the day, there's going to be baseball on. I mean, they've got 60 games to get done. They've already gotten a couple done already. But in a matter of 66 days, or now, probably 63 or 62 days. So they're going to be churning out these games constantly. So it's going to be a lot of fun to watch these games on TV. But again, I want to dive right into it. And there was a lot that went on in the baseball world today, just today alone. Couple injury updates to make note of, and then I'll get into some game recaps. First bit of information to share. Justin Verlander, one of the many stars in that Astros rotation, has recently been diagnosed with a right forearm strain injury, which was initially reported as being a season-ending injury, but manager Dusty Baker immediately commented on that, saying he will not be sitting out the rest of the year, and even Justin Verlander actually came out saying that he won't be shut down for the year either. So, I mean, right there, that's not a great sign if you're the Astros. That's not a good sign that he's out for the foreseeable future, or no real answer on the return table for him as to when he can be back on the mound for the Astros. And I just want to know who made that initial report, though. I mean, because they probably made Verlander not a very happy camper after that one. I mean, how do you just go ahead and jump and assume that, whoever the source was did not give correct information? That's really unfortunate, because Verlander and Baker both corrected whoever made that claim corrected them very, very quickly. Another pitcher that has suffered an injury in the news today, that was Corey Kluber, former Indians ace, now with the Texas Rangers. He actually had to leave his Rangers debut early today because of some shoulder tightness. So, some of these guys are sustaining injuries because they may not be fully prepared. They probably haven't had a whole lot of time to prepare. Spring training was cut down this year. And I think that, it's going to be something that we're going to see continuously throughout this year. And I think a lot of us might have already seen it coming, just because these guys aren't in great shape yet. And some teams, thought that they were, going to be very prepared for this year. And, really, they're still, couple, probably weeks, maybe a few games behind where they want to be ultimately. Now, there are some teams that have completely shown no slowing down. They've come out ready to roll and almost in mid-season form. So, we'll go, there's a little bit of a dichotomy there between between those two different types of teams that are going to be coming out pretty slow and a little rusty, and other teams that are really ready to go and ready to roll. Steven Strasburg, another guy, who was scratched from Saturday, started against the Yankees, had some nerve damage to his hand, so another big name that's going down. But I feel like, again, this might be a trend that we could see throughout the rest of the year. But I think maybe even as the season goes on, maybe a couple guys, they start to come back from these injuries, they start to get into better condition and better shape, and maybe we won't see as many injuries as we're seeing early on in the season. So I want to jump into my recaps now. Going to go around the horn, bunch of different games that were going on today, some big-time blowouts, some really close ones, an extra inning game, a lot to cover. So I want to jump in first with the Braves dismantling the Mets 14-1. I mean, this was a big sign. Not that the Mets aren't a talented team, but how good the Braves are. I mentioned in my last episode how Atlanta will be the clear first-place team, I think, but the Mets should not be counted out. I mean, they can really, make a run at first, but with 14 runs being scored against them and those runs coming consistently throughout the game and a lot of guys getting involved from the plate, Dansby Swanson going 3 for 5, Ozzie Albies going 3 for 6. These young guys are starting to get going and could really give the Braves some extra talent and depth for later in the season. And I know I mentioned in my last breakdown for the NL East, I said the Mets could be, a good solid second place team. Right now, after today's game, the Braves have made it very well known that there is a clear divide, as of right now in the season, between them and the Mets. So, again, the Braves seem to be that clear-cut first-place favorite team, and the Mets, again, they could be right there in second, but there's a lot of room that separates the two teams. Marlins defeating the Phillies 11-6. I mean, I was shocked by this one. I mean, Miami, really came out swinging, brought a lot of firepower today from the plate. Miguel Rojas, he came up just a double shy of hitting the cycle. Actually, something that has yet to be done in Marlins history. So we could have seen some very, very early on season history today if Miguel Rojas had hit that double. Corey Dickerson going 2 for 5. Maybe I was wrong about my prediction about the NL East this year. It is just one game. There's 50 plus more to go. So, we'll have to see how this season pans out for the Phillies and the Marlins. But maybe the Marlins, they have some sort of miraculous season that nobody sees coming, and they kind of become, I don't want to use the term Cinderella, but, kind of that out of nowhere team that you don't see performing well at all, and then all of a sudden they come out of nowhere and they're making a case and making a run for being in the playoffs and being a top tier team in that division. So we'll see what happens with the Phillies and with the Marlins. Baltimore against Boston, this was another really big shock. Baltimore beating Boston 7-4, and the reason why it was such a big shock is because the Orioles, they're coming out swinging in this first series of the season, taking 2 of 3 from the Red Sox. JD Martinez today going 0 for 4 from the plate for the Sox, which was a big difference from his opening day performance where he went 2 for 5 from the plate with 3 RBIs. So obviously, if you're a Sox fan, I wouldn't be worried. Again, it's a little too early to really make any judgments on any teams right now. But like I've said 1,000 times, and I'll probably say 1,000 times more, teams can't afford to drop 7 of 9 or 6 of 8. There just isn't enough time to make up that lost ground. But regardless, good for the Orioles. I'm sure we will hear probably more about these two teams as the season goes on. We will definitely hear more about these two teams in my AL East breakdown later on in the show, so stay tuned for that one. But again, good for the Orioles coming out with a winning record after the first series of the season, 2-1 record so far. So, that could be a promising sign for Baltimore. Detroit beating Cincinnati 3-2. Cincy came off to a very slow start. Especially in the last few days, this game, it was no different than the last couple games that they've had leading up to today. And a team I really think that could actually be pretty good this year. They made some great offseason acquisitions with Mike Moustakas, Nick Castellanos, but Detroit seemed to do a really great job defensively and also a fantastic job driving in runs while still being out-hit by the Reds. Right there, if you're a team that's able to still put up runs and still win ball games and be out-hit by your opponents, you're doing two things. One, you're efficiently getting guys on base at a very high rate, and 2, you are being very productive in terms of getting those guys scored and getting those guys, home from, wherever they were on the base path. That's a really big sign, because if you're a team that usually is getting out-hit and you can't produce runs, that's a recipe for disaster. But if you can at least be efficient and produce at an efficient level, getting those runs in, still being out hit by other opponents, that's a great sign. So we'll see how the Detroit Tigers kind of pan out this year. But again, watch for the Reds. I think the Reds could be a big team that could really make a serious push in that NL Central, and I'll mention it later on in the show. That NL Central is very competitive. I don't want to say it's wide open, but there's 4 teams that are vying for first place that are legitimate contenders right now. So it's going to be a fun turnout to this season, especially in this NL Central, and it's going to be very, very fascinating to see how that division kind of plays out for the rest of the season. Toronto taking on Tampa Bay, an extra inning game, one of the first ones we've had. I know we've already had one with actually on a walk-off on the opening day, walk-off grand slam for the Athletics beating the Angels. I mean, what better way to kick off opening day than with a walk-off grand slam in extra innings? How much more do you want? What can't be written any better, can it? That's unbelievable. That is such an awesome thing to have happen, on the first day of the season, and it's really just setting up, this year for potentially an even more exciting, midway point and possibly finishing point, honestly, too, and even into the postseason, and I'll talk about that expanded playoff format. That's going to be a very interesting and exciting addition to this year also. The Rays have really come out strong through the first few days of the season, and in this game, there was actually, 2 instances where the Jays could have taken this one. They go into the final inning leading the Rays 4-2. Tampa tacks on 2 more runs, but then Toronto adds another run in the top of the 10th. And if you're in this position, if you were the team going into the bottom half of the inning, so the hometown team, after allowing a run in the top half of the inning to the away team, especially in the extra inning settings, that's a hard thing to come back from. You've got your back against the wall, and it's do or die. You either go up, get a guy on base, and try and drive him home and at least tie the game and keep it going in extras, or you just win the ball game. That is, you're literally, down to your last 3 outs, and you got to make the most of it, really. The Rays actually had only a 1.5% chance of winning the game today. So again, it just shows you that this team doesn't back down at all from any sort of challenge. And I'll get into them later on in the episode, but they could really have a big year this year in the AL East. I wouldn't be shocked if we saw them again, one of those top teams in that division, fighting with the Red Sox and the Yankees for those, first 2-3 spots. Twins against White Sox, 14-2. Minnesota absolutely whomping on Chicago. Again, I mentioned the Twins on Saturday's episode, and for very good reason. This is a team that is dangerous, and today, again, they showed us why. They jumped all over the White Sox, scoring 9 runs by the 3rd inning. They scored, literally 4 runs in the first and 5 runs in the second, something like that. You're jumping out that big of a lead that early on. You're really in mid-season form, and there was a couple teams in these last few days where we saw they're already there. They're waiting for the playoffs. They're waiting for the postseason, and teams like the Twins, like the Red Sox, or the Yankees, like the Dodgers. These teams are legitimate contenders, and they could really make a push for the World Series into the playoffs. So, right there, a great sign that Minnesota is able to get something going early on in this season, getting a double-digit scoring total, and also, really putting up, 14 runs on a team like the White Sox, who I think they could be a very good team this year. They really have a lot of potential. I'm a big fan of Tim Anderson. I think he provides a lot of offense and defense, reigning batting champ. They also added Yasmani Grandal over the offseason. He mixes in well with them, great offensive piece. And they've got their hands full, again, with the Twins, though, because this team, I think Minnesota, they've got so much talent, they've got so much depth. They're kind of like the Braves, honestly, in the AL sense. They've got a lot of depth. They've got a good mixture of veterans versus young guys. Nelson Cruz is one guy to make massive note of, because there's no sign of slowing down for Nelson Cruz. He's 40 years old. He had a 2-home-run, 7 RBI day today. He went 4 for 5 from the plate. He's found the fountain of youth. He's last couple years, he's been at the best in his career. He's played the best baseball. And, with him putting up big numbers, Josh Donaldson being added to the team in the offseason, a guy that's, been a reigning MVP before, and he's played at the highest level possible. Eddie Rosario, he went 1 for 4 from the plate, kind of a modest day for him, but again, a guy that is able to really fill it up from the plate and get things, put balls in play that is going to make it difficult for defenses. And I know, with the shifting and everything else that goes on in the MLB this year, and I know, for me, what I've noticed is a lot of guys have been hitting into that shift with the guy playing right behind second base. I mean, that's going to be a big thing. That's taking away a huge, huge gap in the infield by putting somebody right in between where center field and second base is. That's taking away, probably about 60% of where a lot of really good hitters put the ball in play, right up the middle, right in the center part of the field. And by shifting over and taking that away, I mean, it's going to make things a little bit more challenging, a little bit harder for hitters throughout this year. And another guy to mention on this Twins team, and I'm probably going to mention him many times because I'm a big fan of him, Mitch Garver. I mean, Alex Avila, he got the start tonight behind the plate, but Garver, he's got the potential to be a very solid catcher in the game. I think he's got a very bright future ahead of him. This Twins team is destined to go deep in the playoffs this year, and they just have to keep this momentum rolling throughout the season. They can't let fatigue set in. They can't get tired, and they definitely have to stay healthy throughout the entire season. Now, this next game, it might be a little bit of a worry for some Houston fans, or maybe it's not. Who knows? Again, it's very early on in the season, so we can't really make any aggressive, bold predictions about teams, that might be coming out to, a 2-1 record through the first weekend of baseball, like the Orioles. We have no idea what's going to happen in, by game 30. For all we know, the Orioles could win, maybe 8 more games and then go on, a 5, 6, 7 game losing streak and wind up having a 10-20 record through the first 30 games. These first 3, 4, 5 games really, you can't base anything off of it yet. So you got to, give it a little bit of time, let it breathe a little bit. But Seattle actually wound up beating the Astros 7-6 today, and it was a hit fest for both teams. The Astros compiled 9 hits while the Mariners made contact on 11 pitches, resulting in hits. A big top 8 for the Mariners, and this was the big difference maker for them. Scored 3 runs in the top half of the inning, and that's ultimately what propelled them to a victory. Verlander now being out for who knows how long could really hurt this Astros rotation. And if you're a Houston fan, again, yes, they lost, but a bigger loss is having Justin Verlander out for who knows how long, for however long that might be, and, with no timetable on him. That's not good. That is not a good sign. I mean, they still have Zach Greinke, but they need to keep him healthy because if he goes down too, they could really find themselves in an uphill battle the rest of this year. I mean, like the Yankees, I'm going to mention later on in the show about their pitching. This Astros team, they've got a lot of holes in their pitching, but they make up for it incredibly with hitting. Same thing with the Dodgers. They're another team that the pitching's a little iffy, but their hitting is just so deep and it's so dangerous that it kind of makes up for it, honestly. Again, if you're looking at it a defensive standpoint, though, not really, because, you really need your pitchers to keep balls from going outside of the infield. And once you start getting hits that go into the outfield, whether they're outs, fly balls, or if they're deep drives, towards the warning track that could be extra base hits or home runs, that's when you start having problems. But if these pitchers for these big-time teams that have a lot of hitting, if they're able to keep their runs at a minimum and, potentially try and drive the score up themselves, then they could really, benefit in the long run, and they might not have to worry about how their pitching might unfold. They might be like, hey, you know what? We've got great hitting. Our pitching's all right. As long as we put a great defense behind our pitcher, we'll be okay. We just need to make sure that the offense is really strong. So we'll see what happens with the Astros this year. Unfortunately, we don't get to see the kind of reaction that they would get going from, ballpark to ballpark, how fans would react to them with everything that went on in the offseason about the cheating allegations and the cheating whole entire debacle really that they had with the trash can that was the signifier kind of for their signs, and so on and so forth, and everything that happened with Alex Cora and Carlos Beltran. I mean, it was a wild offseason if you were a Houston Astros player or, employee, fan, whatever. I'm sure it was pretty crazy seeing your team in the news all the time. But nonetheless, got the loss today against the Mariners. Again, if I was an Astros fan, I would not be worried, and if I was a Mariners fan, I would not get my hopes up too high. It's a little bit too early on the season to start getting, that excited or that down about just one game. The next game I want to talk about is, I'm going to talk about this team later on in the show. I think that they could be really good. That's the Arizona Diamondbacks. I think that they could be a very good team this year. They beat San Diego 4-3, and I'm going to talk about a little bit actually San Diego later on because I think that these two teams, they could be pretty neck and neck with each other in the NL West. They're going to be fighting for that second place spot. I think the Diamondbacks will eventually get it. But the Padres, they're going to be right behind them, nipping at their heels. They're not going to be far behind. And it's really going to be the Dodgers that are going to be separating themselves from everybody else, I think, leaps and bounds, really. And it's pretty clear to see the talent divide and the talent separation that the Dodgers have amongst themselves and other teams in that division. But Arizona and San Diego, they're two fairly comparable teams. I think San Diego's got a little bit more of an up-and-coming young, rising star field because they do have some very young players coming up. They've got Fernando Tatis Jr., who's had a very good early-on career. Will Myers, he's got a lot of potential. Manny Machado, signing him, we all know what he can do. So they've got a lot of really, really good guys on that Padres team. On the other hand, though, the Diamondbacks today, they had a huge performance from Ketel Marte, who's a player that I personally am a big fan of. I think he brings so much defense, even more offense to the lineup. Went 2 for 3 on the day. David Peralta went 2 for 4 from the plate. So if they get guys like Marte consistently hitting, Starling Marte did not have a great day from the plate, but if they can get extra help from Peralta, from, Calhoun, other guys that are on that roster that provide a lot of offense, this could be a team that could go deep into the season. This team could really make a serious run and really, make a legitimate push for potentially the division title, if not at least a playoff spot. And who knows what happens in the playoffs. I think a lot of teams are going into it with this feeling of, hey, you know what? With the 60-game season, if we can get through that, the playoffs are a totally different season in itself. 16 more games potentially. We really have to go into it with a completely, new mindset. But again, how is fatigue going to factor in? That's what we're going to see. Will we see teams starting to get tired and start to slack later on in the year? Now, another thing to make note of was the pitching today. D-backs had a great outing from Zach Gallen. I think that he could be, another sneaky guy on that rotation, with Robbie Ray, with Madison Bumgarner, that really provides some really good pitching. Had 6 Ks over 4 innings of work, 2.25 ERA today. So, he's capable and has the potential to be special and have a really, I don't want to say, an unbelievable career or an all-star career, but a career that, at least is solid enough to get his team to where they need to be and to put his team to the point where they should be. And, if he's able to do that, I think that, and, obviously with the hitting falling into place as well, I think this D-backs team could really be a very, very good team in the long run. So, there was a lot of good baseball over the weekend. There was a lot of great games, not only today on Sunday, but also on Saturday. Friday, obviously the opening day games on Thursday that I went into depth on and, talked about for the Saturday episode. So I'm really excited about, what I've seen so far, and I'm really excited for this week and the games that we will have in store for us. I know tomorrow on Monday I'm going to be watching the D-backs and Padres game coming on at 4:00. So, like I mentioned in that last that last couple seconds of the segment, it's going to be a matchup that's going to be fun to watch. I think those are going to be two teams that are going to be battling it out for the rest of this season, and they're going to be, two division foes that I think will definitely have some, potentially down-to-the-wire finishes, and, who knows, it might become a neck-and-neck finish to whoever can make that second-place spot in that NL West division. So, folks, that's going to close it out for our first segment today. Thanks so much for listening, but don't go anywhere because I'll be coming back in our second segment here talking about which teams can benefit the most from this new expanded playoff format, where I could see teams finishing up, and ultimately, what teams could maybe make a legitimate run and really have a solid hold on that second spot in their said division. So stick around, folks, because we'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA, to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back, everyone, to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer again, and segment 1 was filled with scores and recaps of various games, something I'm going to call Around the Horn, where I just give brief recaps and rundowns of numerous games of that day. Don't go anywhere after this segment, folks, because later on in the show, I'll be ranking my top 5 greatest Yankees vs. Red Sox moments of all time, one of the most storied rivalries in sports and really in all of baseball. I want to get into my next topic now, which is teams that I think could benefit from this new expanded playoff format. I'll discuss what the playoff format is for this year, and then mention the teams, why they are good candidates for having successful seasons in this odd and peculiar season that we're going to have. But really, I think the playoffs are going to be the bright and shining star of this entire kind of new format, if you will, because these playoffs, A, it's going to be more teams, B, it's just going to be more baseball for people to watch. So getting into what these expanded playoffs are going to entail, the number of teams has expanded from 10 to 16. So every single first and second place team can make the playoffs in each division. And then after that, the next 2 best teams in each division will also make the playoffs. So now, instead of only 5 teams from the NL and from the AL, now it's going to be 8 teams from the AL and the NL. Again, largening the pool a little bit, making it a little bit bigger, but also giving more baseball to fans, because at the end of the day, with only 60 regular season games, I'm sure people are going to want to see much more playoff action, especially with everything being abbreviated this year. It'll be a best-of-3 wildcard series as opposed to a one-game playoff also. So that is, again, something else that is new. They'll kind of do away this year with the one sudden death game in the wildcard series, and now it's just going to be pretty much a 3-game series. And so I'll get into which teams I think could also benefit from that, because, again, giving another team another opportunity and an added kind of chance, really, at getting out of that one-game playoff that a lot of teams kind of run into issues with. There's a lot of nerves, there's a lot of intensity that goes into those games, and they're high-pressure moments. So for the most part, if you're able to get through that, then you'd have probably no problem with this new format with this wild card series. But if you're a team that usually folds in those games, now you've got a second and possibly a third chance at potentially getting out of that round and into the NL or ALDS. Now, also, by extending those first-round games, again, is allowing more teams to get in the playoffs, but it's also going to make some money back for these networks. A lot of these networks are going to be losing a lot of money this year because of the less amount of airtime that these teams will be receiving. So in a sense, it's really everybody wins. The teams will get a little bit more publicity, and they'll get to play a little bit more. The players get to play more. The fans get more baseball, and then the networks get more TV rights, TV deals, and being able to televise and broadcast the game out to everybody in the entire world. So again, everybody kind of wins in the end of this. There are a lot of teams that I think could really benefit from this expansion, like I keep mentioning. And some of these teams, they're not necessarily your top tier teams. These are going to be teams that, will probably float around that second and third spot in their said divisions, and it's really going to matter as to whether or not those teams are going to be able to, A, make sure that they can keep hold of those second and third spots in their divisions, but also make sure that the other teams in their division, they can try and keep, a fair amount of separation between them and the rest of the other teams in that division. So the first team I'm going to get into that I think could greatly benefit from this is the Oakland A's. One of the best small market teams in baseball. They have consistently fallen in second place the last 2 years, but they have slowly climbed their way up the rankings in the division, and they are right there in terms of having a big breakout year. Last 2 years, finishing in second place. So this is, again, a team that is right there knocking out the door and has the potential to really have a big-time year. This kind of reminds me of how the Royals were in 2014, 2015 in terms of how they have this small window of time to win before they can't, afford certain players, and they have to kind of start from, square one, because that's usually what happens. A lot of these guys, they have really good years for some of these teams, and they want more money, and these organizations, they just can't pay them. So they, again, have to go back to the drawing board after about 2 or 3 years. Now, with only 60 games this year, a lot of these players can be fresh for the playoffs. They don't have to have, that added pressure of, potentially being edged out because of wild card standings. Now they can play fairly comfortably for the most part, and as long as they can get out to a strong start and keep that momentum going the entire season, most of these teams can find themselves sitting pretty for the most of the year, whether it's in first or second place. And again, even if you're not in first or second place, as long as you're right there, right underneath those teams, top 8 teams in those divisions, they're going to make the playoffs. So you just got to keep that ball rolling throughout the year. And so it's going to be interesting to see, what the Athletics will do as the year goes on. Again, they're a prime example of a team that is in a top-heavy league, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Basically, just teams or leagues that have really 1 or 2 heavy-hitting teams that are really the dominating franchises, if you will, and the rest of the teams usually aren't the greatest. Again, the AL West is a prime example of that. Last couple years, the Angels, they haven't done a whole lot. Again, they could possibly be okay. I could see them, being a team that has a strong start possibly in this new format. But the Rangers and the Mariners, they haven't really done anything special the last few years, so, won't necessarily be hard for the A's, I feel, to comfortably sit at second, because, again, most of us know that the Astros will most likely be back on top of that division, and the A's, they're that team that has that opportunity to slide right into that second place spot with how the Mariners have been the last couple years. The Angels, again, they're kind of in limbo. They're kind of a team that can go either way, and the Rangers, I mean, what have the Rangers done? I mean, they haven't really done a whole lot in the last couple years, and they haven't really necessarily added any big pieces. I mean, if anything, they've lost players. So it could really pay dividend for the A's in the long run, having those other 3 weaker teams in their division, and really just having them to worry about the Astros and really nobody else. Losing the wild card in each of the last 2 years, I think the A's are a team that, again, they're right there. They're definitely knocking at the door, and they're a team that continues to get better. They're a young team. They really like to use their farm system. They like to bring in-house talent. But again, they've got a lot of potential. They've got a lot of really, really good players, one of them being Marcus Semien. I mean, he had an unbelievable year last year, was actually in the MVP race. Also finished with a .285 batting average, 33 bombs with 92 runs batted in. So a guy that puts up really big power numbers. They also have Matt Chapman, big-time third baseman for them, coming off an all-star year and a Gold Glove a year also. So, again, they've got guys that can get it done in the field, at the plate, and they're a type of team that they don't have those big-name, massive stars like a Bryce Harper or a Mike Trout, but they have guys like Chapman, Semien, and a lot of other guys that are able to fill in those spots and fill in where they are needed most. And at the end of the day, that's what's going to be needed as the season continues on and as the season really starts to get underway here. Now, the next team that I think will really benefit from this expansion, and I put all the bias aside in this one, and that's the Milwaukee Brewers, and here's why. Yes, I know I'm a huge Milwaukee fan, but the reason I picked them wasn't for my fandom, but rather they are a prime team that can take advantage of the second place finish playoff spot, but also the potential playoff matchup that they could find themselves in. This is a team that the last few years, in the playoffs that they found themselves in those different situations, those different series, it's really been tough for them. They've had a couple tough breaks, whether it's been bad breaks for, pitching-wise, a couple miscues in the field, especially for last year in the wild card game in the NL. It was just a couple miscues and a couple errors, and a couple balls don't get hit in the field that they were. and, a couple plays don't happen the way that they do, and we could be having a totally different conversation about the Brewers and the Nationals from last year. But, unfortunately, it did not pan out for the Brewers, and it is what it is. And again, the year before that, going the distance in 7 games with the Dodgers, they were just simply outlasted with a deeper roster. I mean, the Brewers were pretty deep that year, no question about it. But the Dodgers, they just kept bringing in that firepower, and it just seemed like there was no shot for the Brewers to really get over that hump. I mean, they really made a big push for it, but they weren't able to ultimately come out on top. So a team that is waiting for that opportunity, they're that prime candidate that, they're just waiting for a good matchup in this new format that they could potentially put together a really solid run. Now, I know that they lost a lot of key guys from last year's team. Yasmani Grandal, who's now with the White Sox, one of the better hitting catchers in the league, one of the better catchers in general. I mean, the guy's a very good baseball player. And then Mike Moustakas, who was a big part of their success the last 2 years, especially in 2018, him going to the Cincinnati Reds. As a fan, you always hate to see one of the star players on the team that you root for go to a divisional rival. You hate to see that. I have no problem with Mike Moustakas. I think he's a fantastic baseball player, and now he's kind of giving a new dimension to the Reds, and they could be really good this year. I think that the Reds have a potential to be, one of those top 3 teams in that NL Central. Cubs, Brewers, even the Cardinals and the Reds. It's going to be a tough competitive division and year this year in that NL Central. But again, they still have Yelich, who if they keep around for a few more years and they surround him with really great supporting cast, they could go far in the postseason. If not this year, but, definitely in later years, I could see them having a big time run because, not too long ago they were 1 game away from the World Series, and they haven't been to the World Series since the 80s. So right there, they're a team that, again, they're in that window. And a lot of these teams are kind of in this window of time in which that they can potentially win before these guys on their team get too big and they have to pay them too much money. So Milwaukee, right there, they're in the middle of that window. They need to take advantage of this shortened season and potentially, this very incredible playoff expansion that I think is going to benefit a lot of other teams besides the ones that I'll mention. Now, in addition to their incredible hitting, or not, I wouldn't say incredible hitting, but very solid hitting. I would say they have very solid hitting as a whole. They add some pretty good pieces. Justin Smoke from the Blue Jays. They also added Eric Sogard. So, and they all obviously have Lorenzo Cain as well. So, they still have some pretty solid players to surround Yelich with. Now, what I want to talk about is their bullpen. I think that they've got a fantastic bullpen. Corey Knebel's back. He's one of the top relievers. He was a closer before Josh Hader kind of rose in the ranks of that bullpen. But again, Josh Hader, one of the best closers in the league. After Brandon Woodruff, now I'm talking about their rotation, after Brandon Woodruff, it really starts to thin out. And so that is kind of the one thing that I worry. It's not necessarily their bullpen. It's not necessarily their hitting or, necessarily their fielding, but it's really that starting pitching. Because, yeah, they've got Woodruff, and he's a really solid, guy for them in particular. I think on other teams he would probably be a pretty decent, like, second or third option. But I think for the team that he's on right now, he's a good ace for them. They did lose Chase Anderson, so they've lost a couple guys in their rotation that they had before. Now, a couple guys that could potentially be good. Adrian Hauser, former bullpen guy. He had an impressive 12 starts last year, had a 3.28 ERA in those 12 starts. And then also Josh Lindblom. He's an interesting case because he hasn't pitched really much in the MLB in the last 5 years. The only professional baseball that he's played is in Korea. So the question will be, is he ready for this year? Is he ready for the MLB style of play? Who knows? Their bullpen is, again, not the issue. It's going to be the starters that everyone should watch for this year. They could be a team, though, that could really take advantage of this unique playoff format. I mean, this could be the year that they really kind of blossom and turn into the team that, again, me personally, I think that they have the potential to be one of the top teams in the NL, but they've also proved it the last couple years. So, again, that's my second team that I think could really benefit from this format. And the last team that I want to highlight as a squad that could honestly benefit the most, I think, out of this expansion of playoffs, and it's the Arizona Diamondbacks. And I know this, again, might be kind of an odd pick, but this is a team that I think is slowly bubbling to the surface in the league. They had some key off-season pickups, and they are, again, like the AL West, in a very top-heavy division. And so those divisions where it's really just those 1-2 teams that you have to worry about, those 3, 4, 5 teams, they're really not of your concern. So it takes off, again, the pressure a little bit of those second-place teams. They only have to compete with that first-place team instead of, Team 3, Team 4, and Team 5. With the Dodgers really running the show out west, the Diamondbacks, they have that opportunity to try and focus solely on the other teams in the division by keeping them out of the second-place spot, but also having their eyes on trying to get that first-place position. I think the Rockies and the Giants, they will struggle this year in the NL West. I really do think that they're going to be teams that will probably be at the bottom rung of the division. Now, the Padres, they are an interesting case. I could see them potentially being a close third-place team. They have a pretty solid team overall, a lot of young guys, a lot of up-and-coming guys. They added Manny Machado last year, so they have the potential to be, pretty decent and maybe make a run for that second-place spot right behind Arizona. But the Diamondbacks, they added Madison Bumgarner, who, again, he's, been a very solid ace, if not second option for the Giants the last couple years. Robbie Ray is another really solid third option guy. I know I talked about in the last episode Patrick Corbin of how good of a third option he is. I think Robbie Ray is very similar in that same case. You don't think of him as being a first or second, big-time guy in your rotation. But, again, he's a very solid third, fourth option because you don't really see him being a dominating factor, and then all of a sudden he's blowing the ball by you, and he's got 10 strikeouts. I mean, he had over 200 strikeouts last year. He had a very, very good year, about a little bit over a 3 ERA, so he's got really good numbers. He's got a really, really high potential, and he was an All-Star in 2017. He's 28 years old, and a guy that hasn't had any serious injuries. I mean, he could really start to get the ball rolling in his career. This could be, where he starts to ascend, honestly. They also bolstered their hitting big time. They added a nice piece, I think, from the Pittsburgh Pirates, Starling Marte. He's going to be a very good player for them. He's a hard-hitting center fielder, covers a lot of ground in the outfield. Now, an issue for him, though, has been the question of his level of care to play. A lot of times when he was in Pittsburgh, he didn't seem to care sometimes. He would be very careless in the field, on the base path, so he can make those simple mistakes. And again, a season that is shortened like this, there is very small room for error. And so if you're the Diamondbacks, you got to really keep an eye on Starling Marte and make sure that he's able to come and produce and play at a very high efficient rating and level every single day. But on top of it, he doesn't make any stupid, silly mistakes, because that is what's going to come to bite them and him personally back later on in the season if they're, not able to get any sort of, late season push, if you will, if they come out to a slow start this year, which, for the most part, they've had a pretty solid start for the most part. Again, we're only a couple of games in, so it's really hard to judge right now, where teams are standing. Now, when we get, into the first full week of the season, the second, third full week of the season, then we can really start to gauge and judge how these teams are going to wind up finishing as the year goes on. They also bring back Ketel Marte, and he is one of the, he was a big player last year. I mean, he kind of came out of nowhere. He had a huge year for them last year, batted .329 with a .981 OPS, 32 homers, 92 RBI. So again, very similar to how the A's have Marcus Semien. Ketel Marte is another guy that you add that to really any lineup, and you're already going to be providing a lot of offense to that team. So it'll be interesting to see how, they handle the Marte and how they kind of mesh together, but also with the pitching. It's going to be interesting to see because really, Robbie Ray and Madison Bumgarner, they're kind of the highlights of that rotation. So it'll be interesting to see where guys can fill in from there. You also throw in right fielder Cole Calhoun, who he also put up huge slugging numbers. 33 homers, 74 RBIs last year. He's another guy that can, really drive in runs for this team and really can be a threat from the plate. I know the season, again, like I mentioned, I know the season just started, but he's starting off to a very strong start. I think he's got, about a 429 average right now. He's over a 1.2 or 1.3 OPS. And again, this is as of Sunday, July 26th. So these statistics could change very drastically in the next week or so. But again, a good sign that Calhoun is off to a good start. He could be potentially, building off of the season that he had last year. And again, like I keep bringing up, that top-heavy division is going to be key. Teams like the A's and the Diamondbacks, but also, and those are kind of the two prominent leagues, I think, that have really the most top-heavy feel to them, if you will. The NL Central's pretty even, and again, I'll keep on breaking down more and more into this segment. I'll actually be talking, or later on in the show, I should say, I'll be talking about the AL East, and as I continue to do episodes, I'll keep on doing breakdowns of the various divisions. But, as a general feel, I think that the NL Central is a very evenly competitive league. They've got 4 solid teams this year. The Pirates, they could possibly make some noise. Who knows? The AL Central, again, another very evenly spread team, I think, between the Indians, the Twins, and the White Sox. I think all 3 of those teams could, fluctuate all throughout the year. But the Diamondbacks, I think that they've got it pretty made. I mean, if they really come out to, continue on to a solid start and they continue to build up that momentum and keep this ball rolling throughout the year, I mean, we could be having a totally different conversation about how the Diamondbacks are going to be viewed because, again, this is a team, I mean, it's an expansion team, a team that has, had, success here and there, but for the most part, they haven't really, blown up, if you will, as a big-time, franchise. And again, this could be a season that we start to see teams that we would have never normally seen have an impressive and a really strong year because of these 60 games. And I know this is going to be a constant theme that, myself and probably many others will bring up because there's just a fraction of games now. And so as a result, it opens the gates for really anything. And same thing with the Athletics. I mean, if they're able to keep those young guys healthy, if they're able to continue to develop and progress those young guys in-house and in their farm system, they're one of the best teams with developing in-house talent. So I think that the A's, if they can continue this trend going forward, not only this year, but also in years to come, they could be another team that we could be having a totally different conversation about in a couple years and looking back and saying, wow, they really had a stretch of incredible seasons because of the philosophy and the style of managing and really just top to bottom running of the organization. It's an incredible organization as a whole because they do it such, like I keep mentioning, they do such a good job at developing that talent in their farm system. So again, we'll see how the A's do. We'll see how the Diamondbacks do. And the Brewers, they're right there in that NL Central. Now, they've got a little bit more to worry about because, again, they've got the Reds and the Cardinals and the Cubs. There's 3, A teams right there that could be in first place, and B, there's 3 other teams, including the Brewers, so 4 teams that could be legitimate playoff-style teams. So it's going to be, a lot of elbowing around in the NL Central to see who's able to try and climb their way up out of that division, not only in that first-place spot, but also that second-place spot. So that'll close it out here for us in this second segment, but don't go anywhere because coming up, I'll get into my breakdown of the AL East and share who I think can really rise to the occasion and can be the division winner and who is going to have a tougher time getting to the top. Stick around, folks. We will be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be, visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back from that commercial break. Great to have you all still here with me on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer with you, and if you are just joining us, last segment was an interesting one, as I discussed which teams I think could benefit the most from the new playoffs and the new format being used for this postseason. I want to now move into my breakdown of the AL East, and last time I did a division breakdown of the NL East, so I want to stick with the East theme and go with the NL's counterpart. Now, the AL East is an interesting division because I have had many conversations about which division is the most competitive, and a lot of people have argued that this division is really one of the most competitive in the MLB, if not the most. So I'll run down the rankings of who I think will come in first, all the way down to last place. I'll get it started with number one, and leaps and bounds, by far, I think that this team is going to be first place in this division and most likely a serious World Series contender, and that's the New York Yankees. Look, they literally look like they're in mid-season form. They're just waiting for the postseason to start, and they've already been playing games, really, it seems like they've been playing games for months now, really. They look just in complete and utter tip-top shape, ready for games to play. They're already, like I said, they're preparing for the fall. They know how good of a team they have. They've come out swinging in last couple games. Opening day had a really strong performance against the Nationals. Their lineup is unbelievable. It consists of power hitter after power hitter. They've got good pitching. Across the entire board, they're a solid baseball team. Aaron Judge and Giancarlo Stanton both had very solid starts to the season last week. And Garrett Cole, well, he was typical Garrett Cole. They're coming off an incredible 103-win season. They add Cole in the offseason. How much more do you need to know that they're seriously contending and seriously going to be fighting for a World Series this year? They are going to definitely be one of the top teams, if not the top team, to win the World Series this year. I think a lot of people have them or the Dodgers probably, 9 times out of 10 picked in either winning the World Series or at least appearing in the World Series, so one of the two. And again, with the divisional rival of Boston losing Mookie Betts in the offseason, this could pose an issue for the Red Sox in the long run. So the Yankees, again, they'll be able to take advantage of that, and they can try and keep some separation between them and the Red Sox. Now, although the Yankees did lose Didi Gregorius, who I think has the potential to be a very good shortstop in this league for quite some time, again, adding Garrett Cole to that rotation has just made them that much more dominant. Not to mention, they didn't lose any major player in their lineup. DJ LeMahieu's still there, Judge, Stanton, Gleyber Torres, who's had a great last 2 years, Gary Sanchez, who, he's a very, very capable hitter, and he's a very good hitter for a catcher as well. Sanchez is actually coming off a career year. He broke the Yankees franchise record of most home runs in a season, which he actually broke his own record that he set about back in 2017. So it was originally 33 home runs, and then he beat it last year for 34 home runs. He's been an all-star 2 of the last 3 seasons, and again, we all know what Stan and Judge have done in their careers. Now, Stan and Judge have both had histories of some various injuries, and some, a little bit more severe than others, but it has affected their durability. So with them, being healthy and being able to miss as little action as possible, this team can be a serious World Series contender, like I keep mentioning. They've got the recipe to go all the way. They also have some very good young talent, Miguel Andujar being one of the bright young stars in that organization. Back in 2018, he had an incredible year, batted .297, hit 27 home runs, finished second in the Rookie of the Year voting, so a very promising career for him. Now, this is what I do think could potentially be an issue. I know I said their pitching is solid, but their rotation tends to be, a little bit iffy. That's the big question mark right there. After Cole, again, it thins out. Luis Severino is probably out for another year. Tanaka is aging. So Cole is really that bright and shining, player in that rotation, but he's going to need a lot of support of other guys in the rotation. Now, they do have a pretty solid bullpen. They obviously have Aroldis Chapman he's one of the best closers in the game, hands down. They also have Zach Britton, who's a ground ball machine. Had a 77.2% ground ball rating last year. Having those guys in your pen is definitely a good sign and a great late inning asset that you want in a, late game close situation. You don't want a pitcher that's going to give up a lot of, long fly balls deep in the outfield. You want a guy that's going to strike out guys and also get outs on the ground and try and minimize not only guys getting on base, but also if somebody does get on base, those players moving over, on the base path. So it's going to be an interesting year for the Yankees, and it's definitely going to be a big thing to watch as to how their rotation handles, the rest of the season, and, really can Judge and Stanton both stay healthy for the rest of this year. Now, the second place team, who I think is again, like I mentioned in the last segment, I was talking about the Oakland Athletics. This team is another very small payroll team, small market team that does an unbelievable job each year. I mean, they've time in and time out, they've been able to at least find themselves, near the top, if not, that second place spot in the AL East consistently the last couple of years, and that's the Tampa Bay Rays. I mean, they're a very, very solid baseball team that, again, they could also benefit from this playoff format. I mean, it's a team that is consistently right there in the division, and they do a great job of trading and picking up guys in free agency, and that are, not necessarily star players, but solid, consistent players mixed in with those young budding stars, and they can really, put together a great team with the little payroll that they have. A team with one of the best, if not the best, farm systems in baseball. Also, they're known for the growing in-house talent like the Athletics and bringing guys up through the minors. Last year, they had a 96-66 season. They came in second place. They have some players that, again, are not superstars, but they are solid players. Brandon Lowe being one of those guys, a young second baseman coming off a great year where he had 17 homers, 15 RBIs, and an 850 OPS. So he's a guy that will get on base for this team. And again, I mean, when you're able to get on consistently for your team and you put yourself in a position where guys behind you are able to score those runs and have a high percentage with runners in scoring position, that's going to just add, more and more runs to your score and ultimately give you more and more wins as the year goes on. Another guy that I think could be really good in addition to Brandon Lowe is Austin Meadows. Meadows came over in a trade from the Pirates that I know a lot of Pirates fans are not happy about to this day. I mean, I know a lot of Pirates fans. I have a lot of very good friends that are Pirates fans, and they talk about Meadows, and they talk about, receiving Archer in that trade and how it's just not panned out for them at all. And the Rays, they come away with a big-time win in that trade for sure. Both Meadows and another player that I'll mention, Stephen Brault, Tyler Glasnow and Austin Meadows, both players coming over in that Pirates trade that really have been great additions to this Rays team. So, I mean, he's an all-around, very good player. He's 24. He's got a lot of potential, a lot of upside, someone that, who could potentially be in this organization for a long time. They also have some pretty solid pitching, worth noting. Blake Snell, Cy Young winner in 2018, Charlie Morton, who is another case of a pitcher that's, gotten better with age. They have guys that can support them defensively. And again, like I mentioned, Tyler Glasnow, he's pitched incredibly before he got hurt. I mean, unfortunately, he suffered an injury, and that really slowed him down for the rest of the year and actually put him out for quite some time after that. But he came out to a hot start. Went 6-1 with a 1.78 ERA through the first 12 games of work. So, he's a very, very capable starting pitcher for sure. And with this pitching, this can definitely pose a threat to teams like the Yankees, with that big lineup. You catch them on a bad day, and it can go the Rays' way, and they can definitely be a major competitor for the Yankees. I mean, they usually fall in that second place spot, and with the new format giving second place teams a playoff spot, last year through the first 60 games they went 37-23, so they can make a serious run for the playoffs. And they're a team that is able to come out to a pretty solid hot start. And again, you do not have a whole lot of room to mess up. And so it's only going to take, 5 or 6 games that you mess up on, or that you lose or you drop, that could eventually come back to bite you later on in the season. So again, a great sign that they last year, came out to a very solid start through the first 60 games. Hopefully they're able to do that this year. They, had a pretty solid, for the most part, start to this year. Again, we're very early on in the season, so we'll see how things pan out. But this is a team that I could, definitely see making a solid run in the playoffs this year. If one of these young stars really takes off, it could be a big, big, big year for Tampa Bay. Now, third place, I think some people I don't know if they'll be happy with this, and they'll probably think, why did you put them there? And you actually think the Rays are going to be second place? Yes, I genuinely think the Rays could find themselves in second place. And Boston, I think, will be a solid third team in this division. Now, I will get to the fourth place team, but I think it will be a close, finish between those two teams, between Boston and the team after them that I will mention in a little bit. Boston losing Mookie Betts takes a big hit. They do keep J.D. Martinez, who is a massive, massive power hitter, and Rafael Devers, who, again, they both were 30-plus home run guys, and Devers is another young star, and he's got a promising career. I mean, he's not just a player that will be good for many years, but someone who has the potential to be one of the best in the league as time goes on. So, again, Devers is a guy to watch as time, goes on and his career continues to progress. They also lose Porcello and Price. Rick Porcello now with the Mets and David Price now with the Dodgers, who has decided to opt out of the season this year. Chris Sale is still around, but he's not going to be able to probably play this year, recovering from Tommy John surgery. So there's a lot of holes with their pitching. I mean, that could really pose an issue for them down the road. They're similar to the Yankees a little bit, but, pretty strong batting, but iffy pitching. But again, the Red Sox pitching is, I think, much weaker than the Yankees, and I think the Yankees have such a much deeper lineup than the Red Sox do. They had a near 500 record last year through 60 games, just a little bit above 500. I think they were around a 31-29 record through those first 60 games. But they're a team that could, come out slow, and I mean they had a pretty solid performance against the Orioles on opening day, but then the next night they got completely rocked. So, that inconsistency cannot happen. And if you're the Sox, and again, with the uncertainty with their pitching, this could prove to be a very long 60-game season for them. So, again, they're a team that no matter what, they will always be in the conversation. No matter whatever way you swing it, no matter whatever way you look at that division, the Red Sox will be in the competition to be or at least the conversation to be one of the better teams in the AL East. Will that happen this year? We'll have to see. Who knows? Maybe, not having Betts and not having that pitching, maybe a couple other guys kind of rise up. And, I mean, they've got that Alex Verdugo guy. He's a very good baseball player. He's a guy that is going to have another very long career. And they've got these young guys that are going to be around for years to come. And they're a team that is able to pay their guys. So keeping Devers around, however long J.D. Martinez can keep playing. They've got Jackie Bradley Jr. in center field. He's really good. They've got Benintendi. They've got a lot of guys that could potentially, take off and have very promising careers. So the Red Sox, for all we know, they could be planning for the future and saying, hey, we're not going to worry about this year. We're going to plan ahead. And, in the next 2, 3, 4 years, we're going to go back to, the Red Sox that we were in the 2000s and, the 2010s, really. So the number 4 team in the AL East, the team that I think, again, they'll be close to the Red Sox. And this may be a little shocking to some people. But, again, the key word is potentially. I could potentially see them being close to the Sox, and that's the Blue Jays. I mean, Toronto, they're one of those teams that, again, they've got a lot of young talent. They haven't really figured out that talent yet. I think those players are still very inexperienced, but they're being thrown into it at a very, early on part of their career. So as a result, I think as time goes on, it will progress them and it will help them improve much more than, say, if they were, entering the league at a later age. Vladimir Guerrero Jr., Kevin Biggio, both those guys are pretty young, and they're coming into the MLB pretty young, and they're getting major action at the plate and in the field. So that's just going to give them more experience for down the road. I mean, Kevin Biggio, son of Craig Biggio, as we all know, Hall of Fame baseball player for the Astros. Vlad Jr., the son of Vladimir Guerrero, again, another Hall of Fame player. They also added some pretty solid pitching over the offseason. Hyun-Jin Ryu, who was an incredible pitcher for the Dodgers last year, had a really good year, all-star year last year. Chase Anderson, who I think, again, for the Brewers last year, like I mentioned in the previous segment, he was a guy that, he did a pretty good job for them last year. Not an ace, and again, he was probably that second option for Milwaukee last year, but I think now with the Blue Jays, he might again be that second, maybe even third option. And they also have Tanner Roark, all very seasoned veterans. Two of the three of them coming from teams where, again, they were one of the better pitchers on those respective teams. And they didn't have a terrible record through 60 games last year. That's another thing that I noticed. I mean, they were only 6 games under 500. So you factor in pretty solid veteran pitching, a young core group of guys, and a team that, they might get off to a slow start, but they could also come out to a very strong start. They can kind of, go either way, if you will. But again, they can't have that, 6-game hole that they were in through those first 60 games. They can't have that, happen early on, especially with, the shortened season, obviously. But with some decent pitching, young talented hitting, they could legitimately be a decent team. And again, they're going to have to handle the Rays and the Yankees, and those are going to be two teams that are going to be a handful for them to deal with. But if they're able to, have that effective pitching and the young stars start stepping up a little bit more, I mean, Vlad Guerrero Jr. had a really good year last year, and everybody sees it. He's got so much potential. Biggio's kid the same way. They've got a lot of guys. I mean, unfortunately, they lost Justin Smoke. He was a guy that was really, really good for them last year. I'm pretty sure it was either last year or the year before he was an all-star. So he's older, though. He's in his 30s, so maybe it was a good thing that they got rid of him, but at the same time, he does provide leadership. He's a veteran, he's experienced, so on and so forth, a good bat in the lineup, but they still are set with, players for the future. And I think, again, like the Red Sox, they could be potentially planning for, a future run down the road. Another thing to make note of is that they're a big-time power-hitting team. I mean, last year, they hit 247 total home runs as an entire squad. That's a lot of home runs. That was top 10 in the MLB, and they were the only team in the MLB in that top 10 ranking that had a losing record. So, again, aside from the fact that they had a losing record, the fact that they are able to hang with the best of the best and hit that many home runs as an entire team as a whole, that's, again, a very promising sight that as baseball continues to go towards and trend towards those power numbers and really driving in runs, that's just going to be an even better sign for Toronto because, again, it's setting themselves up for, the future. And with this young team, they could very well have a breakout year. I mean, maybe not necessarily this year, but it could maybe propel them to, a third or, second place finish in the division for years to come. Again, they do have the pitching, and I think it will take, a couple years for the most part. But if these guys start going, pretty hard and pretty strong these next couple games, these next couple weeks, we could see a totally different Blue Jays team than we're used to seeing. And this could be a season that, they really kind of have a coming out party, if you will. Now, the number 5 team, the last place team, and, I hate to do this to this team, but I have no choice because I just really don't see any hope for them. And that's the Baltimore Orioles. I mean, this is a franchise that has fallen on hard times over the years. And last year proved to be almost a rock bottom point for them as they only won 54 total games last year. Their loss total, I'll put it into perspective, their loss total was 5 shy of the Yankees' win total. That's how bad they were. Pretty much an opposite record of the first place team. Yet last year the Yankees had, 103 wins. So, Baltimore had, what would that be? 103 minus 5, 98 losses or whatever it was. I mean, that's really, really bad. When you're having nearly 100 losses on the entire year and you can barely win, 50 games, that is saying something about your organization. And I hate to say that about Baltimore because they're a very storied franchise. They've had a lot of success in previous years and many years ago. But they just, as of recently in the last couple of years, they just haven't been able to get anything to go. They didn't lose anyone in the offseason, but again, they didn't add many pieces either. It was kind of neutral. They kind of stayed the same. And they didn't go out finding anyone prolific to really try and booster their, lineup, really. I mean, with Trey Mancini's offseason procedure to remove a tumor, and again, no idea when he will be back, this team could really be in trouble for the entire season with the lack of weapons they have in their lineup. And, besides Mancini, there wasn't any other player that batted above 280 or had an 800 or higher OPS. So with really your main guy now out for the season and for however long, what are you going to do? You have a whole bunch of missing spots and places to patch up in that lineup, and they don't have the personnel to do that. And as a team, their pitching surrendered the 3rd most runs last year in the league, and they made very few acquisitions in the offseason. So not only is the hitting an issue, the pitching is also a problem. And if you're pitching, whether it's starting or the bullpen, relief guys coming in, giving up that many runs that often, there's no wonder that you're losing nearly 100 games. It doesn't come to as a shock that that many games are being dropped by one team. Another thing to make note of about this team, they do not get off to a hot start either. They are not a team that comes out and gets, the ball rolling. And I think no matter what the situation was this year, I don't think they, really had any hope. And again, I think I've mentioned it before, but I've always said that the Orioles are kind of a team that tend to get stuck in a rut. And no matter how strong of a team they might have, or however strong of a start they might have, if they start going on a down a wrong path, and they start going in a losing trend and getting on a losing streak or whatever, that's when they start to really dig themselves into a deeper and deeper hole. They're not a team that is able to pull themselves out of that tough position and try and get back on the winning train. It's really, once they start losing, it's just a snowball effect downhill, and you cannot have that, especially with only 60 games this year. And if this team is anything like they are on paper, it's going to be a long season for them, no matter what. Again, they're a young team. Their oldest player on the roster from last year is still around, Chris Davis, and he's fallen off drastically after that incredible 1 year that he had, where he had like 50 plus home runs or whatever it was. But he has fallen off drastically, and if that's your most successful player, if you will, that's not great. That is not a good sign. He's, on the decline, and a hard decline of his career. And again, most of the other guys, they're in their early or mid-20s, so, maybe this team has a promising future ahead of itself, if they take those correct measures, if they're managed well, if their front office do a good job of, drafting, developing guys in their minor league system, they could be a pretty decent team down the road. But again, it's not going to be for, any time soon. It's going to be a long endeavor for them, and they're definitely going to have to really grind their way through these next couple years. And, hopefully some of these younger stars and these younger guys on this team, can, kind of find themselves bubbling to the surface, if you will, and really try and make a name for themselves and potentially put the Orioles on the map. So that's my 1 through 5 ranking of the AL East. That's my prediction. Again, Yankees, Rays, Red Sox, Blue Jays, and Orioles. Watch out for the Rays and look to see how the Red Sox and Blue Jays finish amongst each other in that division. It could be a neck-and-neck finish for them. Who knows? The Blue Jays could actually finish higher than the Red Sox. So I think the first 2 spots are pretty locked, as well as the 5th, but those 3, 4 spots could definitely, alternate and change throughout the year. Again, another great segment here today. Thanks for sticking around and tuning in here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcasting Network. We're going to take a quick break here, folks, but don't change that channel. We've got a great final segment for you all, as I'll be ranking my top 5 greatest Yankees Red Sox moments of all time, a topic that I thought would be great to discuss, especially with the season just now starting, and looking back at some of the most storied rivalries with 2 of the most storied franchises in all of baseball history. I'm Jack Ridenour, and we will be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup final.
Listen now.
Hey everyone, and thanks for sticking around for the 4th and final segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenour is still here, and in our last segment, I jumped into the breakdown and prediction of this year's AL East. I shared where each team was going to land or could land in the division, and some pros and cons that the 5 teams each possess. In our final segment here today, I want to discuss a rivalry that has lasted for decades, one that dates back to the earlier part of the 1900s, and that still continues today. That's the Red Sox and the Yankees' infamous rivalry that has encircled the two storied franchises for so long. There have been countless moments in their long-standing rivalry that have been monumental and truly unforgettable. I want to highlight my personal top 5 Yankees-Red Sox moments and discuss those games and/or series and what all occurred during those iconic matchups. So I'll get into it, and I'll jump into number 5, and it's a moment that really resonates strongly in Red Sox-Yankees history, and it's the infamous play known as the steal in 2004 during the ALCS that current Dodgers manager Dave Roberts was actually a part of. A very, very incredible game, and I'm going to touch on this series a lot more in this segment because this ALCS was one of the biggest probably in the 2000s, just sheerly because of what the Red Sox were able to accomplish and also the catastrophic downfall that the Yankees had. But again, I'll get into it later on. There's going to be more talk about this series, so I'll stay with this number 5 pick. And this was during the year the Red Sox went on their infamous run to the World Series where they would go on to win and break the 86-year curse of the Bambino that swirled around the team. Earlier in the season, Dave Roberts came over from the Dodgers, actually, in an acquisition that paid off incredibly for the Red Sox. Now, this happened in the Game 4 matchup of the ALCS in 2004, where the Red Sox found themselves down 3-0 to the Yankees. And the Red Sox seemed to be completely out of luck and continuing to extend the drought of a World Series win. But in Game 4, Kevin Millar comes to the plate, and this is where things really start to change, and the momentum slowly starts to shift for the Red Sox. He works the count, gets a walk, actually winds up getting on base, and he actually gets pinch run for, or Dave Roberts comes in and pinch runs for Kevin Millar. So Dave Roberts is now on first base in this game against the Yankees. Mariano Rivera, one of the greatest, if not the greatest closers of all time, is on the mound for the Yankees. I mean, it was a big-time series. Roberts was known as a speedy runner and a very good base stealer, and I think many people probably knew he was going to have to put himself in a scoring position, so I think most people knew that he was going to steal, or at least trying to steal. Rivera definitely tried to keep him in check. He threw over to first a couple times, nearly picked him off, actually, but Roberts was able to stay on the bag each time and avoid the tag. He eventually takes off and goes to slide for first, or slides for second. Meanwhile, the pitch, it's a great pitch sent into Jorge Posada, who was one of the greatest catchers for the Yankees. He had an incredible career there and was part of those very illustrious teams that they had in the early 2000s. He threw a rifle down to second base, and Roberts was able to just barely get his hand on the bag and come up safe for the Red Sox. Now, people may wonder why this moment is so incredible and monumental, and it's because Roberts would go on to score to start the score that Roberts would bring in, the run that he would bring in, it would start a comeback trend in the game that would lead the Red Sox into extras with the Yankees and eventually take the game for the first of what would be 4 straight wins to eventually come back and win the series to go on to the World Series. That trade back in July really paid dividends for the Red Sox, as that, one moment in the series is what really ignited the run that would take the Red Sox to their first World Series since the 1900s to ultimately break the Bambino curse. Now, number 4, this one is for the Yankees because this moment is ingrained in many Yankees fans' heads as a moment of pure celebration, but for the Red Sox fans, this is a moment that, that you probably would rather forget if you're a Red Sox fan. Now, this happened back in 1978, and it was a season where the Yankees and the Red Sox both found themselves atop the division. And ultimately, at the end of the year, both of them being tied for first place, it forced a tiebreaker into a sudden death one-game playoff for the division. It was very noteworthy. It was a very noteworthy year for the Yankees, mainly because they actually were down 14 games in the month of July or the month of August to the Red Sox for that first place of the division. So they were able to climb themselves out of that deficit. They were able to ultimately, bring it to a tie-breaking game. And the Red Sox in that tiebreaker, they jumped out all over the Yankees, really. I mean, they came out to, an early 2-0 lead. They held that lead going into the 7th inning. Now, this is where things start to get weird and things start to change and shift for the Yankees. A name that we will hear in this, selection, and I'm going to bring up his name now, Bucky Dent. He was no superstar. He was an average player. He'd hit about 40 or so career home runs at the time of this at-bat. So someone that didn't really pose any sort of threat or so, no serious offensive weapon really for the Yankees. And so the Red Sox probably did not think anything of it. So Dent would step to the plate with men on both first and second as Chris Chambliss and Roy White both singled to get on. Dent would then send a shot deep to left over the Green Monster at Fenway Park to put the Yankees out 3-2. They eventually added a couple extra runs, but the Red Sox, they didn't stop knocking at the door. They actually wound up pulling within one, but again, it wasn't enough as the Yankees would come away in this one to win the tiebreaker. Now, this was actually a very monumental moment that still haunts Red Sox fans to this day. An article I was reading on MLB.com by Alfred Santasieri, he actually interviewed Dent in Boston and took him back to the ball field. He actually took him back to Fenway Park, and people immediately noticed Dent. I mean, there was, one instance where they actually tried to get Dent into a very famous restaurant in Boston, the Union Oyster House, and the GM of the restaurant, when Alfred, called in to see if he could get a private room for him and Dent to have a, conversation, have dinner, be interviewed or whatever, Alfred was, the GM of the restaurant was floored when Alfred asked him about that, because he was like, no way you're bringing that guy in, but obviously he was okay with it and he eventually allowed it to happen. I mean, there were people that came up to him, that were reminding him where they had been that day that he took down the Red Sox with that one infamous swing. And again, it's a Yankee moment that, definitely came from an unlikely hero, but nonetheless it resulted in an unforgettable moment. So number 3 now. And this is where things start to get really interesting, as these next few Red Sox-Yankees moments are some of the most famous, really, in sports history. And this one will be one that is, again, highlighted later on. This one won't be highlighted on. The next one will be highlighted, actually, 2 times. But this one came in the year before of 2004, 2003, Game 7 of the ALCS. And this one, I think, still haunts Red Sox fans, probably just as much as Bucky Dent hitting that infamous home run in 1978. And, again, we will hear, how the Sox and their fans were able to get revenge and a little bit on the Yankees from this 2003 ALCS. But the Yankees, they were the star of this one. I mean, this series would be the first time the two teams would actually meet up in this fashion in the ALCS. So this would be a series that would go back and forth for both teams, a very historical series for, just really baseball in general. Series was knotted up 3 games each, and ultimately sent the two teams into a deciding Game 7. In Game 7, the two teams, they would throw their aces at each other, with New York bringing out Roger Clemens, who we all know probably very well, and the Red Sox using Pedro Martinez, who again is one of the greatest pitchers of all time. The Red Sox jumped out all over the Yankees to begin, and again, they had that glimmer of hope that they would actually break the curse. There was a couple times in their franchise history after that Bambino curse had started that they really had an opportunity to break it. I mean, 2003 was one year, 1986 was another year, so they had plenty of opportunities. Now, the Yankees, they would not get discouraged, though. After, that big Red Sox lead, they would slowly climb their way back into the game, and they actually wound up cutting the Red Sox lead in half after the 7th inning, 4-2. The Red Sox would add another run, but the bottom of the 8th proved to be crucial. And honestly, what put the Yankees in the position that they would ultimately find themselves in. New York tied things up in the 8th inning, and after 2 scoreless innings in both the 9th and the 10th, the game continued on into the 11th inning. And let me tell you what, folks, if you've never watched an extra inning postseason baseball game, you have not witnessed probably one of the most exciting and on the edge of your seat games and sporting just events that you can watch. I mean, it is intense, just with all the anticipation that builds up in between each pitch. It's a lot. I mean, you're literally, nail-biting and sitting on the edge of your seat waiting to see what will happen. Tim Wakefield, a very famous knuckleball pitcher for the Red Sox for many years, was in to pitch for the Red Sox at this point of the game. And Aaron Boone, who up until then, he'd been a pretty solid player for the Reds, nothing crazy. He actually had an all-star year in 2003, so this was his best year in his career. He was actually acquired that year in a trade for, I'm not quite sure for who, but he wound up going to the Yankees, and he was coming from the Cincinnati Reds. Boone steps in, and the first pitch he sees, he sends it very deep down left field line, and there's that very famous shot of Boone jumping around the bases and jumping on home plate, and it's really considered one of the best moments in Yankees history, but also considered probably one of the biggest downfalls in Boston sports history. The manager for the Red Sox at the time was Grady Little, and he received a massive amount of criticism for keeping Martinez in the game well, beyond the point that he should have been in. I mean, there was many instances where Martinez was known for not being a great pitcher and, going deep into games. Once he got to that 100 pitch count, he usually started to break down a little bit and fatigue would start to set in with him. And so that was very clear. And Little felt that, even with a tired Martinez, it was the best option that they had at the time. A lot of people, beg to differ. There are some people that feel that the lack of offensive production in that game was also to be blamed for why the Red Sox lost. So some people were on, Grady Little's side. But again, ultimately it was a game that went in favor of the Yankees. And this is, again, looked back at as a very historic moment in really baseball history, not just, Yankee Red Sox history, but in baseball history in general. So now getting into the number 2 greatest Yankees Red Sox moment in history. And this is one that I think that a lot of people, they, have to know about, because this is, it's literally like the Steel. It's got a name for this particular game, and that's the Bloody Sock game in 2004, Game 6 of the ALCS. Which Curt Schilling, again, one of the better pitchers that the Red Sox had, very, very storied career, had a, really an impressive career as a pitcher, also pitched for the Diamondbacks as well for some periods of his career, pitched through a Game 6 injury where he actually had an ankle injury. It was a torn tendon in his right ankle. And, I think everyone who is familiar with this game probably has that image in their head of Schilling on the mound with the bloody sock. And you always hear the conspiracy theories of that game. Was he actually injured? Was it a hoax? I've heard crazy things about it was actually just ketchup in his sock. And to the life of me, I'm not sure why anyone would, put ketchup in their sock to go and pitch a Game 6 of the ALCS matchup. Those are some very odd myths, but, conspiracy aside, it was an unbelievable performance nonetheless. A scoreless game through the first 3 innings. The Sox bats really started to wake up in that 4th inning. They scored 4 runs in that lone inning, and Schilling, absolutely put on a performance. 7 strong innings, only gave up 1 run. It was a Bernie Williams home run, and again, the Yankees just couldn't get anything going, and you could tell that Schilling was in pain. He had to go and cover first base one time during the inning, or during the game, and you could tell physically that he was, hurting. He ran over limping, so he was fighting through a lot of pain during this game, and he probably knew what was at stake. This game again would be marked with a lot of controversy because with the score at 4-2, the Yankees were at bat, and a grounder by Alex Rodriguez goes back to Bronson Arroyo, who, a lot of people probably know during his time with the Red Sox and the Reds. Rodriguez, when he was running down to first base, he would actually go and knock the ball out of Arroyo's glove, thus knocking it out of his glove and, allowing Jeter, who was already on base, to score and cut the deficit to 1. The umps look at it, they talk about it, they discuss it, and they actually wind up changing the call. Rodriguez is called out for interference, and Jeter is sent back onto the base path, and this would cause an uproar from fans, from the Yankees bench, from the Yankees coaches. They were not happy about this. But in my opinion, if you knock a guy's glove and the ball comes out, and you physically extend your arms to knock it out, that's interference, clear as day. There's no question about it. You have to be called out. You can't just, come charging down the base path, barreling some guy over. That's not baseball. That is not how it's played. I remember actually another time I saw Rodriguez when he was rounding the bags, off an infield fly, somebody else hit it and he was already on the base path. And so he was coming around, he was going from second to third, he was going by, I believe it was the shortstop. And he winds up actually screaming as the guy's about to catch it. I'm pretty sure the guy dropped it. And so Rodriguez had, he's got a little bit of or had a reputation for being, kind of a distracting player, when he was out on the field, for all these different antics. This game, again, would be a pivotal game as it would send the series into the 7th and final game of the season, or the series, I should say, which leads me right into my number 1 greatest Red Sox-Yankees moment in history, because by far, this is one of the most monumental, historic, the sheer magnitude of this game or these 2 games had, and what they were able to, set up for the Red Sox for the rest of the playoffs. These games were literally why they were able to break the Bambino curse, because once they got to the World Series, it was smooth sailing. I'm pretty sure they swept the St. Louis Cardinals. So it was getting through the Yankees, and because of these monumental moments and these very impactful series of plays in these different games and these different series, that's what set up the Red Sox for their success in 2004. So for me, the most, number 1 greatest Yankee Red Sox performance, it has to be the heroic performance in both Games 4 and 5 by none other than the man himself, David Big Papi Ortiz. Now, Ortiz is a player that will live in baseball glory forever. I mean, he's one of the best power hitters ever, one of the most beloved Red Sox players ever. I mean, he gave that famous speech after the Boston Marathon bombing, this is our city, nobody's going to take it from us. I mean, he's a beloved figure in the city of Boston. So he's a big time player for them. And I mean, in general, in baseball history, he's, again, one of the greatest power hitting sluggers ever. So like Dave Roberts, Ortiz was also very vital in saving the Red Sox season in the ALCS, but it was his bat that was able to get them in the position they found themselves in. Now, again, like I keep mentioning, he was, not the greatest fielder, but in terms of batting and hitting, I mean, he was just a pure-born professional hitter. I mean, you talk about guys, I always talk about Daniel Murphy also. He's another guy that's just a naturally gifted professional hitter that's able to put the ball in play where he wants it. If he wants to hit it out of the infield, if he wants to hit it on the ground, whatever. Big Papi did the same thing, except, I mean, he was putting up huge power numbers. Now, in Game 4, the Yankees found themselves on top 4-3, going into the ninth inning, and really, Mariano Rivera had it in the bag. I mean, he had 2 outs down, he was 1 out away, he had a 1-run lead, and he's the greatest closer of all time. So you would think that the game is over and out of reach. But like I mentioned before, Roberts is able to get on second, and he eventually scores, so that ties the game up. The game now goes into extras, and with both teams putting up scoreless frames in the 10th and the 11th innings, the Sox were heading to bat, in the bottom of the 12th inning, and, this thing's starting to drag out, and we're starting to see, can the Red Sox make some sort of comeback, or can the Yankees finally, finish it out and really put the Red Sox away for this postseason? Manny Ramirez leads off the 12th inning with a single. Now that sets up Ortiz for what would be the final at-bat of the game. Ortiz goes on to crush a 2-run walk-off homer to give the Red Sox their first win of the series, which again would prove to be really the momentum shifter in the entire series. I mean, they go on to win 3 more after that game. So, I mean, if you're the Yankees and you're literally 1 out away and then all of a sudden it just flips like that, that is one of the greatest turnarounds in a series by far. One of the greatest, turning of tables, if you will. You're literally 1 out away from the World Series, and then that one blown save gets flipped around to losing 4 straight games and having the Red Sox defeat you in the ALCS and go to the World Series. I mean, no wonder the Red Sox had so much energy going into those next 3 games after that, huge Game 4, because they knew that they were going to at least, they literally felt that, we've got nothing to lose at this point. It's do or die. We're either winning or we're going home. And so, when you play with that mentality, that brings out the best of you performance-wise. Now, in the next game, Ortiz was not done. With Game 5 starting with the Sox on top 2-0, the Yankees eventually would regain the lead and take it 4-2. The 8th would be all Red Sox as they added 2 runs to, again, put this game into extra innings. This was a down-to-the-wire series. I mean, this would have been a blast to go watch live, and having back-to-back extra inning games, one of them, being in 12 innings, one of them being in 14 innings, and this one was actually the one that would go on into 14 innings. So with the score tied at 4, Ortiz again steps up to the plate, this time with Johnny Damon and Ramirez both on base with 2 outs. Ortiz poked a single into the outfield that drove in Damon and would ultimately give Boston again another victory. The series goes on for 3-2, and then they go on to win the next 2 games. I mean, this would be, the series, like I mentioned, that would, again, propel them into the World Series. They would go on to beat the Cardinals, and break that 86-year-old curse of the Bambino. I mean, it still is an incredible rivalry, and it's been going on for so many years, and I really don't think it'll ever die. And when you look at all sports and you look at all the rivalries that there has ever been and that there ever will be, the Red Sox-Yankees is probably, in my opinion, the most famous or the most regarded, if you will, because, I mean, whenever you ask somebody and you say, what's the biggest or what's the best rivalry in sports that you can think of? I think 9 times out of 10, people will probably throw out at least the Red Sox and the Yankees, maybe the Celtics and the Lakers. There's very few instant thought rivalries that jump into people's minds. And the Red Sox-Yankees, that is definitely one of them. And For me, I've actually been able to witness a Yankees-Red Sox playoff game at Fenway, and the experience was, quite frankly, something that I can't really describe, because there aren't many atmospheres in sports where you can feel the rivalry and that it's, more than a game. There's actually pride that's at stake between these two teams because they've been going at it for so many years. So, folks, that's going to wrap it up for us here today on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. It was great having you all join me today. I'm really excited to continue to, keep bringing you all the best news. I know we've got Around the Horn as a new topic. We're giving all these divisional breakdowns. So, keep sticking around, keep tuning in because there's going to be more news to come, especially with this season. And as it revs up and continues on, it's going to be a fun one to cover, folks. And I can't wait to bring you all the latest news, updates, and topics throughout the season. Once again, thank you for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Again, I'd like to thank you all for listening. I'd also like you to, if you remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice little review, that really helps us. We're always looking for more feedback and looking for ways that we can improve. And also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We'll be giving out all the latest updates on shows, content, news, anything relating to baseball. We're going to be bringing it to you. And as always, folks, until next time on the GSMC Baseball Podcast, thanks so much for tuning in and have a great day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.